Hi, it's Demetrius.
Hey, Demetrius, it's Mark. They're in.
Nice. Taking it to the next level.
Launching Phase 2 of Gable Media on October 7th. 7th.
Hi there, I'm Evan Troxel. Welcome to my podcast about how technology is changing the architectural profession. Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Evan Troxel, and this episode was truly a pleasure to record. I had a conversation with Dane Stokes, and if you don't know who Dane is, you're going to learn a lot about a fascinating individual. Here are just some of the things that we talked about during the recording of this episode. Things like what he's doing to stay sane during the pandemic, which you will find pretty interesting. How he spontaneously started oil painting at one point in his life. How he learned to put rivets in carbon fiber. The topic of one-button buildings. Having kids and failure. And about his very practical decision to transition into architecture from mechanical engineering and custom automotive design and fabrication. So that gives you kind of an idea of who Dane is and what he's all about. Dane is currently a design technology specialist at ZGF Architects in the greater Seattle area. And be sure to check the show notes for a bunch of links, one of which is to his Porsche 914 build thread, which is called Project Anklebiter, which I am right in the middle of reading, and it is awesome. You can learn more about that during the show as well. So obviously, Dane is a fascinating individual and truly a Renaissance man. So it is my pleasure to bring you this conversation with Dane Stokes. How have you been?
I've been good. Yeah, it's been busy. I mean, the last since March, I've been in the office once since March.
Yeah.
And our firm basically said, like, at least our U.S. offices, like, are not even going to try to put together a plan until after the end of the year, which, of course, like, makes sense. Like, what are you going to do? So, but we're also, I don't know, I think we were pretty well set up for it. We'd already, like, all the technology staff were familiar with working from home, and we had everything set up, and we kind of not accidentally, but we transitioned pretty well. Good. We were accidentally very prepared.
You didn't do it on purpose, but man, you were ready for it. That's good.
We were ready.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Man,
are you guys?
I would say what's funny. You said that they kind of said we're not going to make up a plan until after 2020 is over. I think that's a smart move. I think what I've seen happen is they've pre-announced a couple of potential back to the office dates only to have to cancel them. Right. So it didn't make any sense to make it, because they're trying to give people some hope of getting back to normal. But let's be honest, if kids are not in school, there's no back to work. It's just not going to happen.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, there's some countries that are just like giving up on school for a year, and like, why string people along?
Well, so you said your kid's in kindergarten. My oldest just his last year of high school was last year, and so he missed half of a year of his senior year.
Oh yeah.
And now I've got a junior, and I've got a sophomore, and I've got a freshman. And
you got like a dorm room in your house. I thought you were all gonna leave.
Yeah, that's a scary proposition. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, my wife and I were joking, like, oh, this was the year that you were going to get to, like, she's a stay-at-home mom. It's like, this was your year that you were going to get to, like, stay at home and eat bonbons and, like, you've earned it,
right.
And now it's like, oh, no, now you're going to kindergarten.
Now you get to be a teacher, and
yeah.
Brutal. So have you guys joined the craze of, now that you're home and you see everything that's wrong with your home, you have to fix everything?
I am literally building an ADU on our property now. I'm building an entire house.
Contractor style. That's awesome, man.
But yeah, I mean, when else are you going to get this kind of opportunity? Like, just my commute time alone.
Yeah.
is, 10 hours a
Yeah.
week.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so
Found time.
much. Yeah, I feel like I'm working less and getting more
Mm-hmm.
done somehow. Like I have more time for my family and I'm being more productive at work and my own ambitions. Cut a lot of slop out of the system, I
Yeah.
think. The only big downfall is, like those spontaneous work interactions that create the opportunity to build something or, learn that someone is doing something in a way that can be improved or, we're kind of talking in the technology department about, like academic office hours or some kind of thing that, once things go to normal, it doesn't make sense for me to be, I was already working from home 20% of the time, but it doesn't make sense for me to like be in there all the time, but having scheduled things and then also an opportunity to walk through the office and be like, how did you make that? How late
Yep.
were you here
Yep.
last night?
Yep. Yep. Yeah, just the opportunity to overhear a conversation and like let it allow your gears to spin for a little bit, or maybe you've already got an idea that could make a difference right then, and that just isn't happening as much as it used to. I also miss like just the coffee bar interaction with the senior PA who I've known for 15 years, and we talk about cars or what car show he went to or what problem he's solving on a project that he has seen 100 times that still has not been kind of implemented firm wide as a standard, or some unique new challenge that his experience is affording him a way to solve that problem like nobody else can. I mean, those are the things like I love being in an office for, because you don't, like you said, you're not just leaving a Teams channel open all day long where anybody can drop in and just overhear what you're doing or see what you're doing like you could in an office building. And I worry mostly about the emerging professional, the youngsters, as it were, who get to just kind of learn through osmosis in so many ways like that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I made a point of traveling to all of our different offices. At least a couple times a year I'd be in each one of our offices. And it's a great way to drum up work, and it's a great way to have FaceTime with people and have them realize, what they might be doing inefficiently or like things they weren't exposed to, or, I'd give a talk and then the next couple months you'd get this huge influx of work.
Yeah.
And I had enough, I've been doing this for 5 years, so I had enough momentum, at least so far, that people know who I am. But yeah, if you're just starting out, it's a lot harder to kind of build up that awareness virtually that it is to just go do a lunch and learn in DC, and an hour's worth of work will get you months worth of projects.
Right.
So that's we've been doing, our technology group has been doing like weekly talks on Fridays at lunch, where we all, and we get a decent amount of people, but you can't depend on other people's proactive behavior to get work. You have to go to them a lot of times.
So you guys are kind of seeding the culture with this kind of continued communication of types of types of problems you're solving, types of tools you're building, just in hopes to get some kind of like, I could use something like that, right? Or I could use this that's different than that, but maybe related. I could see that.
And then on our data team, we have academic office hours, kind of, where once every other week, it's like an hour where bring anything you want, let's talk about data within the context of our firm. And that brings in a very, you're surprised by the people that show up. And it's awesome because you get contact, you just need a bunch of different avenues, I think, to try to get as many people as you can. Because, we've had people that weren't proactive about contacting people, and then the institutional knowledge of their existence just kind of disappears. And then it's like, what are you doing? What are you doing here? You can't just rely on being assigned things, because you're making it up as you go, at least as far as my trajectory.
Right. Yeah, totally.
It only doesn't exist. Okay, how do you sell this?
Right. Yeah, so it's like partially just having those opportunities for those collisions to happen, but then also being consistent about that takes a level of discipline that a lot of people don't have.
You see that a lot with, whether it's YouTube or whatever kind of medium you're pushing, or, I run the Dynamo meetup group,
Hmm.
which now we're kind of transitioning to the computational design or computational
Yeah.
whatever. Hacking is cool group. But we've had ebbs and flows of activity as is natural. But when you can really string together a solid year of meetings, attendance just skyrockets because it's a predictable thing that people look forward to.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same for anything you're trying to
Yeah.
push. That predictability of media or contact. People know when you're coming and what to expect. That's where you really get traction,
Yeah.
which is hard, darn near impossible now, other than digital formats.
So are you guys doing, you said you had office hours, you've got this computational group that meets. Is it just like people are showing up with a presentation, or are you just showing up with, hey, I need help with this, or here's an idea, let's brainstorm it? Is it just all of the above? Is it just
It's kind of the office hours are like whatever you want,
hmm
just a conversation, and the people that are able to make things happen are there. And anybody can show up and just be like, our project is struggling with whatever, or we have an idea for this, or it's just a very loose kind of thing where the design technology kind of lunch and learns are more of we feature a different, last week we had shared details. The week before I did an intro to Rhino, and then my colleague Andy did a so Rhino, but do you know this?
hmm
Like the little more advanced. So within an hour, we covered the ends of
hmm
Rhino, so everybody learned something. And I mean, I learned something from him when we were going over it.
yeah,
So and then there's always you sprinkle in Revit and Bluebeam and all the other things.
yeah,
So there's kind of two avenues. One is prescriptive, and one is spontaneous.
yeah. I thought it would be fun to kind of talk about, because now you've talked about you're building an ADU.
Yeah.
I remember I attended your desk university.
Yeah, I saw you on there. Yeah, it was good to see you, even
A
digitally.
familiar name, yeah. So then I got to see, and it was like somebody was like, that is the coolest background on
Oh,
Zoom
yeah,
I've
yeah,
ever seen, right? So it's your garage, which you have set up with your 914
yeah,
in the background, and you've got some string lights and a snowboard, and from what I
yeah,
recall. So
yeah,
I mean, and that to me just speaks to what I know about you, as far as like that was it really was the quintessential Dane Stokes backdrop. Okay. And
right.
and now we're talking about these computational design and computational group office hours meetups, lunch and learns. Okay, so there's a few things there, and I think they are all threaded together by where'd you come from, right? So you you
Yeah,
I think it would be cool to kind of just go back, and we talked about as far as topically over email what we could maybe talk about today, and it really kind of evolved from you just being a maker. So where did that all begin? I mean, and then how does that evolve over time to turn into what you're doing with that now?
yeah, yeah. It's a weird story. Whenever I've done a couple talks for our interns or something, it's like how to get here, and I always preface it by being like, if you want to do what I do, you probably shouldn't follow
That
my
your
guidebook,
squiggly path.
exactly,
Yeah.
because I kind of
Yeah.
wander through life in weird ways. But I actually started out as a well, I went to I have always been a maker and a builder and a creator since the beginning of time. My dad was a he taught people how to build military aircraft for Boeing. So he was an instructor where he'd be like, okay, I need to teach people how to put rivets in carbon fiber today. I need to teach people how to use liquid nitrogen to work with whatever. So he always, my whole life I've been surrounded, and my mom is just a totally creative person that just both of my parents kind of let me do whatever I wanted, and it was always geared towards building and creating and gardening and carpentry. So I was not a great high school student at all, like not really interested in kind of the structured existence of
Hmm.
school really at all. I didn't learn math till I was in my 20s. like really. But I went to an automotive technical school called Wyotech when I got out of high school, and got a couple associate's degree in automotive fabrication, chassis design, body work, painting, upholstery. Basically, a degree in automotive restoration. And then ended up at a race shop in Las Vegas that did engine conversions on Porsches, which is why I have an STI engine in my 914. That was kind of we designed we sold kits to do engine conversions. We also did cars in house. So mine was kind of the test bed. We designed, the kit to put a Subaru engine in a 914. I did that for about 2 years. I raced competitively. I was the head of research and development for that team. But by the time I was 22, I had back problems, and I could see that there, you don't see a lot of really old mechanics. And
Yeah.
it's not, I was like, I can't retire. I can't retire in this. I can't keep crashing cars and, racing and lifting transmissions. So I thought, mechanical engineering seemed like a reasonable collegiate, avenue. So I went into mechanical engineering. In order to start engineering, you have to test into Calc 1. And due to my my high school and academic career or lack of interest in math, I didn't qualify for anything. I literally tested from number skills all the way through to get into Calc 1 in one sitting to get into college. And I just got all the For Dummies books from like number skills to geometry and algebra and so going into Calc 1 with no understanding of anything. And pretty quickly I realized that engineering was too focused. I spontaneously started oil painting because half of my brain was being starved. And then it was like, okay, what's like easy engineering with more art in it? And it was like, oh, architecture's cool. I've never been interested specifically in buildings or the AEC environment. I've just been interested in making things. So I went to University of Boulder, got an undergrad degree there. That's where I really got interested in kind of Grasshopper. And it wasn't because of Grasshopper, it was because I was building complex, kind of feature walls and stuff, and doing it manually didn't make sense. It was too hard. It took too long. So, I was never really much of a computer person, but computer enabled me to build real things better and faster and more complicated. So that was kind of how I got into that. And then I got a master's degree at Penn, which really upped I got in with like advanced placement, and I had basically a whole year of electives to take. So, and from any school I wanted. So I did robotics classes and bookmaking classes and programming classes and just really kind of diversified my architectural education into something that was like very tech savvy, but still very grounded in fabrication and the affecting the real world with digital processes. So I interned at my last year of school. I interned at ZGF in the model shop, and they were planning on kind of they moved their interns all around, so you get a flavor of whatever. And when it came time to leave the model shop, I basically didn't leave.
Yeah.
So I was just there for like 4 months and completely ignored the architecture department and everything else, because I was like, no, this is awesome. I've got laser cutters. I've got I'm good. So when it came time to get a job, I went back to ZGF, started as an A1 in architecture, and in less than a year, I had transferred over to technology and kind of made me my own. It was I'm a technology manager now, but it was like a design technology specialist, I think was the term we made up. Just digital fixer.
Right.
And yeah, and I've kind of been here ever since. But it's always kind of stemming from that. I'm not to disparage architecture, but it's never been a huge focus of mine. It's the architecture is the best way to make cool things and have a desk job and get paid to do cool things. It's like that perfect kind of Venn diagram of like, it's real, but it's, you're not a scientist. I don't know. It's that perfect kind of, I never know what I'm going to do every day, and that's what I need.
That's awesome. That's a great way to
Even if
explain.
they're all fires, at least they're all different fires.
And that totally speaks back to your original comment about how you got to where you are, right? Because you never knew what was next, and you've kind of created and then jumped at these opportunities just by being curious. You're such a curious guy, and I know, like, when we got together in New York and had that kind of initial talk about just the stuff that we grew up doing, I felt such a huge like kinship there, because the story is very similar, except your stuff is like next level. Like when you talk about riveting carbon fiber and using liquid nitrogen because you've got to create these conditions to do this thing like that your dad kind of dealt with. Mine was it was like nails and a hammer, right? So like I said, your stuff was probably next level, and that to me is evident in where you've taken it too, right? So when I see that backdrop on Zoom of your like fully custom fabricated 914, because you've done, it's like you couldn't just stop at an engine replacement, right? And I have a trouble.
You
take it to the next level.
I bite off more than I can chew, and then, I mean, I'm totally ADD, but I usually finish most of my projects, even if the Porsche, I've been working on that for.
I was going to ask if you finish your projects or not.
Let's see. I do. It's just a matter of time. It's just how long it's gonna take. But the Porsche, I bought it when I was 18, and I'm 36 now, and it's driving, but it's full tube chassis. I cut the body off the car and then welded it all together and put it back on. Like, I mean, it's it's an escalating issue. But now I've ruined the car so much that I can't not finish it, because then it would mean it would die. Right. And
no one will take it. Like no one could do what you wanted to do with it, because there's so much like embedded knowledge and skill in that thing. There's like, you can't hand that kind of a project off. You didn't comment any of your code, Dane.
Well, I actually have. I have commented pretty well, because I've been following the whole build is documented on it's called 914world.com. The car is called the Ankle Biter, but you can search it and find it. But I have like a 75-page build thread where, when I went off to grad school, I did forget a lot of the things I'd done, and I have to go back to the build thread to remember what I was building, what my logic was, to follow it up, 3 or 4 years later, because you do forget. Yeah. but I will say, like the online, like I've got a group of friends that are following the build, and they're the main reason that I've kept going on it, because I don't want to I don't want to not
the motivation.
Follow through. I don't want to not follow through.
They're the accountability. They're not the motive.
They're the people that I know are going to give me crap if I don't, if I don't finish it. So that's good. It's good to have.
I've got friends like that at the office too, because like I've got the '69 Datsun Roadster that is in the third paint shop, and
I thought it was done.
And I called the guy the other day, and I'm like, hey, I just wanted to get a status update. He's like, can you call you back? I'm in the middle of an estimate, and he never called back. So this is what happens when you drop your beloved project off with some expectation around schedule, and it's not their priority.
I hate to disparage an entire population, but body shops are not necessarily a place to get fast and reliable results. I have found.
You kind of get it when you get it, right? And you don't complain about that. Okay.
And it's a enough thing that you can't do it yourself mostly.
My neighbor did, though. Like he's got a booth in his garage. I should have just talked to him.
Oh wow, yeah.
Anyway, so like my dad was an Air Force mechanic. My grandfather was a geologist, and like out of that came this kind of similar mentality of like, we're going to do a project, right? And we do projects, and we don't always finish them. And I actually, that's kind of an interesting rabbit hole to go down, but I actually had to make a decision. I probably made this decision 10 years ago, maybe something like that. Like, I am actually going to finish my projects that I start, because up until then I had a terrible track record of actually finishing them. So because I'm so interested in so many things that it's easy to get distracted. And I am, like I've said before, I'm trying to live 5 different lives at the same time because we only get one, and I want to make the most of it.
Yep.
And so, I just can't be satisfied, right? So there's so many interesting things out there. There's right now it's like, well, I guess leading up to this point, it was like I just had to finish my license. Like that was actually the first thing that I decided I was going to finish, that I had started,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
17 years prior when I graduated from college. And
Mhm.
it was like I still didn't feel done, and I still had this guilt and this weight on me that I was like, I got to finish that thing so that I can move on. And
Mhm.
through that process of, number one, making that decision, and number two, actually doing it, I built that discipline that I needed to actually finish projects.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that was
That's
quite a
yeah,
process.
no, that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's a great way. I mean, if you can get your license, then I'm sure a lot of other things seemed a lot easier and relative. I would certainly rather build an entire house than go through that process.
Well, yeah, and especially
Uh,
after waiting so long and having 4
yeah.
teenagers at the same, at home when you're doing it, and all of the things that come along with, having a job and having a podcast and having 4 kids and doing these things. And so, like I said, it actually built kind of that disciplinary muscle that I needed to be able to accomplish other things.
Yeah. I will say like a lot of projects that I don't finish are the ones that are, my work, because I'm sure you've experienced this too, like that when you're interacting with teams, the goals change a lot, or whether they need something or not changes a lot, or whether they have time for something or deadlines or whatever. So I do have, I mean, there are, 50 unfinished projects, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to finish them, and that it doesn't mean that you don't come back to them. Because I think as much as we say like all of our buildings are unique, precious jewels that can never be repeated, like the process is not that different, and teams run into the same problems again and again and again. So even if one team didn't, backed out of a thing they wanted, neurotic documentation and saving of, no matter how far you've gotten in a process, it's still farther than nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, I've gone back to, just the other week, I went back to like 2016 and pulled out a script I had done and tweaked it to do something totally different. But you got to have things in your toolkit. Even if the tool isn't done, you've at least done enough exploration to make informed decisions. You've done enough building to know whether something's possible or not. And I think that kind of, there are places where it's okay to only do half of something and then pick it up 5 years later. It doesn't really matter. I mean, you might be like opening up a Dynamo script and being like, okay, let's build this in Rhino inside, but the logic is already figured out, and you've run into, you see where like, oh, Revit won't let you do that, and it doesn't matter what program you're using to hack it. There's certainly, I have very neurotic documentation of my process and the deliverables, because you got to keep marketing happy too,
Right.
Yeah.
It's
got to make the shiny. Yep.
Yeah, you got to make the bells and whistles that people can show off, for sure.
Yep.
But yeah, I think that's an interesting point about this kind of messy process that we find ourselves in. And to me, that doesn't really square with the idea of, like, I think it's come up before in meetings that you and I have been in together, which is big data, AI, right? And it's like, okay, show of hands, who's doing this? And no hands go up, right? Because, it speaks to that process that you just explained, right? Because there isn't consistency and there isn't completion, because it isn't required all the time. A lot of that stuff is just waste of the process. Much like a leftover sheet of plywood that's cut in some weird increment on a job site, right? It's just, that's what it took to get to the end. It didn't really need to be useful beyond that point. And the industry, our industry, architecture, has a problem with that in the marketing side of things, which is we want to be saying that we're using big data. We want to be saying that we're using AI to help us make these decisions and augment our people with good, clean. But again, like, it's just kind of not how it works. And so is it even worth pursuing because that's not how it works and that's not how it has worked ever before? That's a lot of like institutional cultural behavior to try to change. And man, talk about like that's not what we signed up to do, right? We signed up to be architects of buildings, right?
I've had this conversation with, I totally agree with what you said. Like I've had this conversation with a couple of people, and I posed this hypothetical of, if say today we could push a button and a building would come out, I don't think we would be financially rewarded for that, because clients, like a lot of our clients, they reach out to us to build a building, but they also reach out to us to work through problems together, to flush out their ideas. A lot of times when you're in a meeting, like you you learn a lot of things that you didn't even think you would learn about them that would change the deliverable. And if I started a startup and said, okay, one button buildings, I would have no credibility and no one would buy a building from me. So it's kind of this like, even if we were able to accomplish it, which I doubt we are on a I mean, you can build Pulte homes all day, but like a custom academic,
right,
like technology center is not. There's so many moving parts that even if you could somehow miraculously push a button and have it created, I don't think anyone would believe in its validity, at least within the next whatever decade, or until we trust AI more, or we wouldn't have gone through any kind of like conversation or gained the trust of the client to the point that we could push a button and make a thing. So I'm kind of like, I've certainly explored AI and machine learning in certain avenues, but as far as actually creating like going the full automation route, I'm really skeptical, just based on how we sell buildings and how we sell ourselves and how we solve problems. It's not really a car where, and even cars aren't either, but like self-driving relative to architecture seems like a really easy problem to solve.
Interesting,
because
thought.
you don't have the, it's like, don't hit things.
Yeah,
right? Stay in lines. And that's super hard to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's kind of this. I think the biggest gains we've had, which are still another unfinished project that every year we build on and work towards, but computer vision and computer recognition is an area where I think we could inform our process better, because rather than putting a ton of hardware into a building to monitor person movement and then something else to like, then a person to count chairs or whatever, and then someone to log like when they used whatever amenities, you could have one GoPro
camera,
that says, okay, there are 4 people in this room, there are 5 chairs, it's 4/5 full, the TV is not black, so it's being used. Mostly just from the reduction, replacing hardware with software, I think is where we've seen like, okay, this is actually something that we can use right now. But again, then you've got camera in client spaces, which is another whole big brother state thing. So yeah, it's and good luck telling someone, oh no, it's okay, the video camera is just being processed by a computer, it doesn't know you. It's like, well, that's even weirder.
Let's pause for a moment right here and talk about our episode sponsor, Layer App, the must-have app for Revit users. Are you tired of digging for project photos, files, and field data days, if not months, after it's captured? That's the power of Layer. Layer takes all your project-related data, photos, and files and makes them accessible with the click of a button right in Revit. Find out more and start your free 14-day trial at layer.team/Troxel. That's layer.team/TRXL. By the way, if you want to listen to episode 280 of my friend Mark LePage's Entree Architect podcast, you can hear Mark's interview with Zach Soflin the architect turned software developer who created Layer App. Get your free trial at layer.team/TRXL. And now let's get right back to our conversation with Dane Stokes. It's interesting to me to kind of go rewind here through that whole spiel that you just gave, because there's so many interesting things that we could talk about there, and we don't need to hit them all, but there is some kind of romantic notion that you see in certain people talking about that idea of that push button solution, and you're right, it totally does kind of leave the client out of the process, right? It's like, no, it's here was your site, here was the program, here's your building, right? This is exact, and on many levels, what we do as architects is not exclusive like that. It's way more inclusive. Like you said, there's things that come up during that discovery process and through that design process that you would have never imagined would come up, and they influenced the decisions that we made as we went from problem statement to solution. And that is a wild ride. It's not a straight line, right? It's all over the place, and there's lots of starts and stops, and there's lots of redos, and I thought you meant this. Nope, we actually meant this. And actually somebody else just got hired and they think something different, and now we're going to change it.
Yep.
That happens all the time. And so I'm not kind of overtaken by that romanticism put upon this idea of a push button building. I don't think that onebuttonbuildings.com is, I mean, you could check the domain right now. Maybe you're onto something. but that to me that's not what I want to do. And I think it's interesting when we're put in a position as technologists in architecture firms to maybe attempt to do that. It just is like, well, that's not on my list of things to do right now. And I don't know that architecture wants that either. I will also say that there's two arguments, I think, that kind of work on the opposite side of this. And this is kind of where I straddle the line and say, okay, number one, clients like to buy things, not processes, right? So they want a building. If you want one button building, that's what you pay for, and you get it. And you don't necessarily want to spend the next 3 years going through that process because it's scary, it's costly, there's problems, there's ups and downs, it's emotional. There's all these things kind of attached to that process that people don't necessarily want either.
No, I think that's valid, and I think there are certainly plenty of architecture firms that probably do have a lot of I'm speaking specifically for like the kind of clientele that ZGF is going after. Right. One of my colleagues used to work for, I don't know if it was Pulte or whatever created home, but like he wrote a piece of software probably 30 years ago that just told you all the different houses you could make with a pile of shapes, like the foam that they cut out and then stucco on top of. And that was, I think it just depends on what your deliverable is and the complexity of your deliverable and what your client expects, which there could be a huge shift in architecture where it's like, we don't care if it's not as good as it can be. We want something efficient and we just want it cheap and done, which, you can buy a pole building that it probably wasn't created by AI, but it has like 2 parameters going into it. So it's not as complex of an issue. But I mean, I can tell you, like, as far as trying to just from the perspective of Dynamo and Rhino Inside and basic C# automation within the Revit environment, even the variables there, it's really hard to reuse tools, even from project to project. Right. The variables are just so, and I think a lot of that is just a lack of standardization and a lack of understanding of what needs to be standardized. But it's also just kind of the nature of the craft, I think, which I don't know what, in 100 years, what will no longer be sacred or what expectations will be. But, I can tell you right now, it's automation in architecture. There are a couple things that you really do see all the time, renaming room elevations and these kind of, they're more a default in Revit's programming than anything else, but like these are things you have to patch. But yeah, the conscious generation of architecture is I gave it's one of the favorite talks I've given to the AIA. It was like the TAP Technology and Practice this last year. They have their conference in DC, and they put it together where there was someone had to speak for a topic and someone had to speak against it. And I got to speak against automation and computational design, which was like such a treat because we have to be such cheerleaders all the time, and to finally talk about like the real struggles there are.
Yeah.
But there were a couple points I made in that talk that one of them was about generative design, where that's kind of the middle ground. Like, okay, it's not AI, but it's it's like taking parameters and changing them, and then you can see like what's been done. But all of the times that I've done automatic optioneering for teams, they have been completely uninterested in it. And I was kind of wondering why. Is it me? Am I making bad options? Like, is it there too many options? But it was that we go through the scheme and option process not to make options, but to understand the problem better.
To learn. Yeah.
I think to learn. And if you make 10 bad things, then you understand what good is better.
Exactly. And you have the justification for it.
Exactly. And the automation of that process kind of irks me. And I think there's a correlation between that and any other thing you're doing unconsciously, automatically, in a design where maybe you don't understand it as well. And along those lines too, I when you're automating a process, that anyone that's capable of automating a process probably isn't dedicated enough to architecture to understand what they're doing. Understand what the problem is that they're solving. They have the ability to automate. Like, I don't know what I'm creating necessarily in an architectural context. I can create it, but I don't know if it's right or not. I need to rely on real architects with years of experience to tell me, like, yes, that's how a room data sheet goes together.
Well, and how did they get that information, right? How did they get that knowledge, I should say? And it was through making all of those mistakes over all those years.
Yeah.
And to me, like, that's what I'm thinking when you're talking about this is, number one, you're learning through that process, but it doesn't just apply to this project. It applies to all projects from now on. And by going through that process and by learning those things of what does and doesn't work, like I said, it doesn't just apply to this project. So on another one that has a similar problem, during one small piece of that process, you can be like, oh, I've already tried that and it didn't work, and here's why. Let's move on to the next interesting problem.
And I've certainly created tools that, like, say a beginning architect who is more conscious of the technology available to them says, like, this task is so boring, I don't want to do it, which is awesome. Like, I tell people, like, if you're bored at your job, then chances are we can probably automate what you're doing, because you should be doing like fun, engaging, like let's you play with massing studies while I figure out detail tags,
right.
But both of us combined might not necessarily understand what we're actually trying to solve, because I can solve it and they can do it, but there might be more advanced things in play that we don't understand. So I had a conversation with a software developer that they're like, in that talk I'd said, like, you might get an inferior product by automating something. And he was like, why would it be inferior? It's like, because no one that actually knows what process is being automated is taking part in this process. Like, someone new might ask for a thing and I might build a thing, but neither of us have done it for real or understand why we're doing it. So that knowledge feedback, like, how do you integrate? How do you codify that, 50-year knowledge into a tool, rather than just blindly solving a problem maybe you don't understand? I don't know.
I think that there is kind of a tug of war also going on where it's and maybe this is just my perception, so I want to bounce it off you and see. There's kind of this idea that all code that gets written on a project will be reusable. And what you're saying, and that's what I think too, is like there's a lot of unique stuff a lot, and there's actually a lot less reusable stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things in theory that fall apart in practice when you say like when one parameter is different, or one dependency is different, or this is a BIM 360 project, whatever. Like, it's a hard environment, I think, to, I know nothing about like, structural analysis, but I'd imagine like a beam is a beam, and there's maybe a little more, you're not going to be like, well, let's put in glass here. I don't know, whatever. Like, it's just such a weird, diverse environment that we work in that it does not lend itself well to data collection, automation, these repeated tools, which is unfortunate because that's basically what I've based my career on. But there is, clearly enough value to keep me busy all the time. But I'm not going to say it's not a struggle.
Yeah.
And I know you've experienced the same thing where you really do want to reuse everything, because a lot of times it does take longer to build a computational tool than to do something by hand. So it really doesn't make sense to do it unless you're going to reuse it a lot.
Because it does take time to develop that code, that script.
It'll take at least 2 or 3 times as long as
actually
doing it by hand once. Yeah. So if you're only going to do it once, then don't call me,
But like you said, you went back to 2016 and dug up an old script that had the logic already figured out. And nobody in 2016 necessarily thought that in 2020 that was going to pay off again. And that's the kind of stuff that's interesting to me as well, because it's a variable in this equation that is rarely, I don't know, it's hard, you can't quantify that, right? Because you never know what's going to happen, and you never even can count on your memory remembering that thing even existed.
Yeah. And that's a weird thing too, I think, as far as like the vulnerability of having only one person that knows a thing. We had a guy that did all of our post-occupancy evaluations that quit, and all of a sudden, like, the entire process of SurveyMonkey to, what was he using? Like, there were like 14 different, softwares that came together to create this report, and he quit, and then it's like, okay, it's all gone. Like, if I quit, no one would know where to find the marketing materials they rely on, even like the dependencies, like, like all this infrastructure of knowledge. It's been codified, but no one knows how to uncode it. It's a weird place to be for staffing and just institutional knowledge. Like, we all have codified knowledge, whether it's digital or in our brain, but staffing changes, how does that, do you keep the knowledge when someone leaves, or is it just in a different bucket that you still have it, but you don't know how to unlock it? Or the relying on a single person for an entire process is an interesting conundrum.
So this is something that I think you guys, I'm not going to give you 100% score on this quiz right now, but you guys inspired me, and you've created, I don't know how much you want to talk about this kind of web project that you guys have, but you did create some semblance of a way to document, at least with Rhino scripts, Grasshopper scripts, so that somebody else opens it up and kind of can figure out what the hell's going on in there. And to me, that was, not coming from a programming or a coding or even a no-code background, just from like a direct modeling background. That was never a thing, right? Like when you're just modeling and you're putting together pieces, there's no codification of that. It's more of an architectural training, which is composition and light and shadow and space and all those things, which on some level is obviously it's experience and it's all these things, but it's not like a repeatable process like code is. So you guys actually put together kind of a resource. And what I guess my question is when you talk about this idea of somebody who has this kind of this knowledge base and they win the lottery and they walk away, do you guys take a proactive stance in training people so that there's not just one person, or is that just something you're trying to figure out as you go along? Because I know you guys have done other stuff where you do start to put together these standards of coding so that somebody else who comes along can hopefully figure out how to decode it.
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone that's using any kind of code, should annotate, assuming that someone is going to go into it totally blind and have to figure out. And we are reasonably good about that. I think where it falls apart is actually the skill sets of staff and how many people. You could explain the thing entirely, but probably 95% of architecture staff wouldn't even be able to open the program. Not any fault of theirs. It's just like
They
not
don't do it every day.
not their
Yeah.
expertise. It's not. They don't do it at
Yeah.
all, and that's fine. But it if someone can use Grasshopper, say, annotation would certainly help. Building it in a way, grouping things and pairing, logic clumps together is certainly helpful. But I don't know where the stat came from. It's probably not real, but it feels right. Like, if you have 10% of your staff that can open Grasshopper without running away, you're doing better than most firms.
Yeah, that does feel right.
So, there were a decent amount of people using, some people using Grasshopper at ZGF, but I was like the only technology staff person that was really like a firm resource.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of pressure. Like, I get hit by a bus, we lose a lot of tools.
That's why I said win the lottery, Dane. Not.
Yeah. Let me be pessimistic here. But now that computational design has become a little more mainstream, we have a handful of people that anything I've built, they can usually open up, and they might need to call me and be like, "What did you do here?" But generally, you can take it apart and understand how it works. But even still, if I'm running into problems like I'll pick on Dynamo because I
Because
have
we love to pick on
because we
Dynamo.
love it. Yeah. But if I can't get a tool to work that I've built because of some arbitrary, piece of code or some, the link didn't load right or whatever, then how is someone else going to just seamlessly jump in and start
Yeah.
just clicking the button? I really do think you get into this thing where it's like, if you're going to solve a problem that other staff are going to use that tool, it really does have to be like a one button solution.
Totally. I totally agree with that,
Does have,
because if it isn't,
it can't even require dependencies.
yeah. But
You
that's
know?
what's in their pocket every day, right? It's like this thing that just works, and you just have to push this one button and it does the thing that I want it to do. And to me, like, this kind of gets back to that Autodesk open letter that was published, which was basically a bunch of architects saying, damn it, this thing's way too difficult to use. And it's not even doing the things that we've been asking for it to do for this many years. I mean, it really, to me, comes down to how complicated it is to use the software. And I think what you're talking about speaks directly to that. It is for nerds, period. That's what it's for. And that's what it takes to successfully have a decent outcome out of using the software, because the software is absolutely incredible, right? It can do things that most people can't make it do. It's absolutely incredible under the hood. And these other tools that have been kind of strapped onto it, like Dynamo and Rhino Inside and Grasshopper and all these things, can make it do even more stuff by even fewer number of people.
Yeah, I think the Autodesk thing is interesting. I in grad school I had a teacher that after our 3/4 term, she made us delete our models and said, "Okay, now rebuild it for the final." And it was the meanest, most heinous thing that had ever happened to me. But every single person's project got better because they weren't haunted by all of these decisions that were driving things that were no longer important. And I think that when like, Revit is a 20-year-old piece of software. And it wasn't even, Autodesk bought it, and then they poked at it, and then they did all their things, and then they
put lots of Band-Aids on things.
Whatever. Yeah, it's just all Band-Aids. And they needed to, like, 10 years ago, they should have deleted the file and rewrote it, because, as someone that works in the Revit API, you're like, there are a lot of ghosts in here. There are a lot of like weird. It's not like AutoCAD that basically was just a screen for a UI or for an API. It you're like getting it's like playing telephone kind
Right.
of, where the buttons aren't the same as the code, and they really should have done a hard rewrite, which I think is one of the things that is creating this kind of strife, because the user does have to go through a lot of hoops
Mm-hmm.
to generate something that should be intuitive, because like, oh, curtain walls, that's a totally different computer program.
Yeah. Right.
Like building pads, like, oh no, that's a totally different,
Mm.
that works differently. It's just not conducive to a user using it intuitively, I think.
Well, and there's just like a different paradigm now than there was 20 something years ago about making buildings. And right, Revit was designed for documenting buildings.
Mhm,
And now,
mhm,
there was no such concept realistically or in a big way around what people coin as model-based delivery. So now we have people kind of fighting the convention of delivering drawings at all, because there's so much information potentially embedded in the model that what are the
yeah.
drawings for anymore, right? And then there's all kinds of other things fighting that, like contracts and agencies and insurance
Oh
and
yeah.
standard
Yeah.
of care and licensure, and there's so many things pulling in
Mhm,
completely different directions. It's interesting because I think about a program that old that just has been band-aided and band-aided forever versus a program like the only example that comes to mind right now is Apple's Keynote software, which they wrote
mm,
basically because they hated PowerPoint, right? They wasn't doing what they wanted,
yeah.
and they were like, we can do
Yeah.
something better, and they did. They made something absolutely incredible, and it was fun to use. It's probably one of my favorite applications to use ever. And one day they just said, you know what? We've been kind of secretly working on this other version of Keynote that's the future Keynote, and it does
Mhm,
50% less stuff than the one you're used to, but it's the only one we make now. So tough
mm.
luck. Here you go. Like it's going to be awesome someday. It'll get back to it'll get back
Right.
to those features someday. But they basically hit the reset button, like you said. They basically said, we're going to stop doing the band-aids and we're going to start over, because you know what happened in the meantime was the web freaking took off. And they said,
Mhm,
what if you could not only use this on your Mac, but you could also use it on your iPhone, and you could use it on your iPad, and you can use it in the browser, and it's the same experience for everybody? Well, guess what? All this custom Band-Aid stuff that we did in the old version won't work in those newer platforms. So they did it. They did that hard decision and said, we're going to hit the nuclear reset button and start over, and it's going to be a painful few years, but when we get through it, it's going to be amazing. And that's
mhm,
what they did. And Autodesk, has been showing some signs of maybe doing something with a new platform, quantum plasma, whatever you want to call it.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, so for realsies, like what's really going on there? That sounds intriguing. It sounds like you guys, at least they recognize that they need to do it. Now, how to get there is a wicked problem to solve,
Mhm,
I'm sure.
yeah.
But man, in the meantime, things are getting nerdier and nerdier when everybody else is getting more and more used to very simple, elegant, do what I think it's
Mhm,
going to do kind of interfaces.
yeah. We had a funny, like, the design technology department has a weekly chat, and someone was, we basically only talk about Revit problems. And I use Revit, but I'm not, I'm the Rhino guy. I'm the, computational Rhino guy. And someone was like, Dane, why aren't you talking about, like, all your problems? And it's like, what am I supposed to say? Like, Rhino didn't make the shape I want? Like, there's nothing to say, because we barely need any training for it. It does what it needs to, and it's got a command line that it's like, how do I make a line? Like, well, type in line.
Yeah, it's not
It's
hidden
this.
really. Yeah.
I don't have the problems that, and granted, Revit is doing a lot more. Like, we've tried to find other options for Revit for the scale of our projects, and it doesn't
Right.
exist. Like, it I'm giving it a hard time, but I will acknowledge, like, it's the only program that can do, we're probably not going to do documentation on a 1 million square foot building in Rhino, but the simplicity and the bones of it are so much more intuitive that we don't need the support staff to support it the same way that we do for Revit. And I think, like a command line would probably solve a lot of that anyway. Just does your program know English or not?
Right. Right. Yeah, and autocomplete works. It gives you suggested
Yeah, it
options,
has
and
tips
yeah,
on yeah,
it
yeah, and that helps a lot. But
does.
luckily, we've been able to develop. McNeil is in Seattle, so we've been able to develop a pretty good relationship with them, and it's been really interesting, kind of working with that flavor of developer and pairing that against like our relationships with Autodesk. And I think they both are helping us greatly as far as creating software, but they are going about it in
Yeah,
a very different way.
totally different approaches.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Well, I mean, I feel like there's so many other things we could talk about. Maybe we can chat again sometime. But I always, and I didn't warn you about this up front, so feel free to just say no. But I tend to try to link these shows together with the different guests that I have on by asking two questions, and then the final one's not really a question, but so there's three things coming your way here. So the first one is
Okay.
share a personal hack, something that you do to help yourself perform better. It does not have to be digital. I mean, I know that a lot of the stuff we talked about is, but you've got all these other interests. Like, what do you do to motivate yourself or to get yourself more productive? Or I mean, it could be anything like that.
I think attitude, honestly, like it's not a quick fix hack, but right, I kind of got into a situation where like, COVID is, creating a situation where I need to create an ADU on my property for my mom. And I'm like super stoked about it solves a lot of problems for all of us, but I could be really frustrated about having to take on this extra burden and all the work. But at the beginning of this project, I was like, I am going to embrace this project with like love and hard work and positivity, and I'm not going to get down about this. Like, this is going to be awesome. And it's the first project that I really, I focused on my mental state as much as my planning and physical, requirements. And it's really helped a lot, I think, and I've transferred that to other things that are frustrating, and just trying to be mindful and conscious and just come from, whether it's work or whatever, just come from a place of positivity and love, especially in this hellhole of a world that is developing.
Oh man.
We need to just be as mentally positive as possible to try to neutralize just everything, right?
That's a great point.
And yeah, so I think that's something that I've kind of learned. I'm not an angry person or whatever, but like being conscious about your mental state as you approach a problem pays dividends in many other more physical aspects of that project, I think.
Is there anything that you do to help yourself get into that state? Because to me, I think that's where like you have to develop a muscle memory around that over time, or you need a sticky note on the monitor, something to be like smile, whatever it is. And so I'm wondering like if you do anything to help yourself get in that state so that you can set yourself up for success on a project like that.
God, I don't think
just
so.
Get lucky.
I think I just talk to yourself, just tell you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like your self-talk sounds really positive in that way.
Yeah. Just be nice to yourself. Like one of my biggest pet peeves is people saying that they're stupid or that they screwed something up. And it's like, that is life. Like the only reason you know how to do things is because you've done them wrong before. Right. And it's okay whether you're an adult or you're a 5-year-old. Like I've had the worst days of my life. I still I knew how to put on pants. I can feed myself. I know how to ride a bus. I can get to a different city. I am, supporting my family. Like it's so easy to get down on yourself, but it's like, you've come a long way. Like, especially having a kid, you're like, wow, I really started from nothing, didn't I? Right? Right?
Yeah.
Don't discount your past successes that led up to your current failure.
Well, and I'm sure, like you said, you're building this for your mom. Like it's
Yeah.
the things that you talked about are going to come through in a very
Yeah.
different way than if you didn't do that for her.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is going to make your
Um,
future life better too.
exactly. Yep. So these are just lead with love.
That's awesome. That's a
Um,
great tip. I think that is a little bit harder to do for most people right now because of the isolation that many people are feeling, or the fear, or and to watch kind of the news and things devolve around them. It's probably harder and harder to have that attitude. So yeah.
but it's also more important to like, every when I get to have like a meeting with a team that I haven't seen in a long time, like you certainly, if nothing else, this has shown like how wonderful humanity is, and nothing like losing
Mm,
all of your friends to realize like how good you had it
yeah.
and
Yeah.
how valuable they are, and they're not gone, and we will regain some sort of normalcy, but
Yeah.
um yeah, just be kind.
Well, I know you're a busy guy, but is there anybody that you're listening to or reading that is influencing you or inspiring you?
um Honestly, I'm not much of a reader. I I yeah, it's kind of a funny thing, but um I am constantly inspired by other
Hmm.
makers, other people that are pushing. Like I love. Have you seen like Colin Furze on YouTube?
No.
Super kooky Brit that um he builds all these like wacky contraptions that are like very well thought through vehicles, or what flamethrowers or whatever. But um I really do like watching other people make things because it makes it makes what I attempt seem more feasible, even if I have no right to feel more confident. I do.
Yeah, totally.
It's that kind of demonstration of it, and I don't know what the actual science on the transfer of knowledge, but someone showing you how to do something, whether it's digital or recorded or in person, empowers you to take on more yourself.
Totally.
Like right now, like I'm building a whole house, and I have I know construction and wiring and whatever, but like plumbing, how does that work? How PEX, what's
Right.
that? It just we are so blessed to have like such a compendium of digital resources at our fingers that total strangers can really encourage you to like take on more
Totally.
and learn
Totally.
more.
Yeah, if they can do it, you can, because they're usually the first ones to say that. I mean,
Yeah,
I think I was going to ask you, like, how many times during this project have you looked up how to do something on YouTube?
I can't even count every
Exactly.
day.
Yeah, exactly. I'm
Yeah.
going through a similar process myself. I'm not adding a whole new structure, but I'm been remodeling, and it's just incredible the amount of resources out there to help you do the thing that you don't know how to do. And it's like it is almost the Matrix, right? It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
of course there's going to be success and failure and trial and error and all those things when you do it yourself the first time, but oh my god, to just have that resource available is just it's
Hmm.
immeasurable.
Yeah. Yeah. So in short, I think the
The
internet
internet.
um, is, yeah, like how cool is that?
That's amazing.
But yeah, it's totally true. I mean, especially in this isolated, my dad knows a lot and he's certainly helped, but like we're figuring it out, and now you have the tools. I if if I were to read, it would just be reference materials anyway.
Right, right.
It'd be like it would just be. I want to see have something show me how to do something. And that goes for digital processes or
Yeah,
whatever. Um, we're smart cookies, and we can figure it out if someone shows us, and not being afraid to fail, because it just gives you another opportunity to not
yeah.
fail.
I have to go install a couple of windows at some point this week myself. So I've already
Oh,
been doing that research because the windows I took out are smaller than the new ones I'm putting in. So there's all kinds of
yeah,
waterproofing
yeah, yeah.
issues and there's
Yep.
so many things that you have to take into account that if you've never done it before, like you just got to have a place to
Yeah.
start. So
Yeah, direction of overlaps is important.
totally. Yes. Okay, first, understand gravity. Second, understand
Yeah,
water
yeah.
does not just go.
Prevailing winds,
Yeah. I was going
yeah.
to say, it doesn't just come from the up to the down position. It goes sideways, and
Yep.
man, so many
Yeah.
things.
But I just a quick aside, like I want to tack on to that concept. It having a kid is really interesting because I mean, maybe it's a side effect of whatever privilege I've had, but like I'm not afraid to screw up if it was honestly done. If it was in the intent of doing something right,
Yeah.
and if you learn from it, and there's no such thing as a failure. If you've learned from it, and teaching my daughter, who initially I don't know where it came from, but initially it seems like we're programmed to be horrified of failure and like frustrated by a lack of success. And I think that takes a lot of discipline to kind of like realize that it's just part of the process.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think something that a lot of people get trained towards is perfection, right? Instead of experimentation and fail fast and learn from it.
Yep.
Or even putting your mistakes on display, right?
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people try to hide that kind of thing. And it's funny, again, like bringing it back to YouTube, I think that that's where it's okay to show your humanity and the real life that comes along with that. We're all just faking it till we make it, and we're trying to figure out how to do
Right.
stuff. And that what I love about YouTube is that it's not all perfect. It's not all perfectly produced, and
not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's honest.
Yep. It is authentic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And they'll tell you like, this might not be the right way to do it, but this is what I'm going to do. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, thanks for being honest
And
about
it gives you
Like,
some confidence to be like, well, I could
Yeah.
try that, and if I screw up, what's the harm?
Yeah. then I'm not alone.
Yes. All right. Well, last question is there anywhere online or in not really real life, but COVID real life, where people can find out more about you or follow along with what you're doing? You mentioned this forum, but is there anywhere else?
Yeah. So if you go to danestokes.com, all of my some outdated ZGF stuff is there, and all of my like kind of personal and favorite academic projects, and my car and my motorcycle and everything I've done is at danestokes.com.
That's awesome.
So you can head on over there, and there's a contact thing too. So if you want to chat, hit me up, no problem. I'm always interested in meeting new people, especially now that my opportunities of meeting people are quite limited now.
Well, it's amazing how like available people are now too, right? So
yeah, it's weird, isn't
yes.
it? Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, it's just different. Yeah.
So virtual coffee with Dane at danestokes.com.
Yeah,
there you go.
For sure. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time. I mean, you are a very generous person, and you can see it and you can hear it in your voice, and so I appreciate that about you. And hopefully, we can do this again sometime soon.
Absolutely, it was really great talking to you. It's been too long, so certainly hit me up again. I'd be happy to chat.
Once again, a big thank you to the sponsor of this episode, Layer App, the flexible database for architects that makes it easy to view photos, files, and project data right in Revit. Remember, start your free 14-day trial at layer.team/TRXL. Thanks for hanging out with us today. This show is part of the Gable Media Podcast Network. You can see all the shows at gablemedia.com. That's GABLMEDIA.com. You can help support what I'm doing here by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts to help get the word out, and of course, share it with your friends. I'd love to hear from you, so leave a comment on the website at trxl.co/podcast, where you can find every episode. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube. Just search for eTroxel. Talk to you soon.